Subcommittee of the Georgia House. We will be reading first readers and assigning them to subcommittee. Part of the requirements of this committee is that the author or his or her designee be here for a short explanation of what the bill does and stand for any questions that any members of this committee may have. So having said that, the chair recognizes Representative Powell, but first on House Bill 647, the Secretary will read the caption.
Hang on just a second, Mr. Speaker. Chairman. 647. House Bill 647 by Representative Powell and others to amend Chapter 7, Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to income taxes so as to authorize the Commissioner of Revenue to disclose the fact of whether a person filed an individual state income tax return.
And that will be assigned to the Income Tax Subcommittee. Representative Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and ladies and gentlemen of the committee. Bring to you House Bill 647. This was put in late in the session last year, and you know, I was talking with some folks, and we were discussing some of the problems that that we kept thinking last year when House Bill 87 was being debated, and it seemed to me to be several issues that it came up, and it was all based about taxation. And what this bill does, it says that that individuals in Georgia who have earned income in Georgia but have not filed a Georgia income tax return for the previous year, that they'll have their withholdings from their check tax at the rate of 6% for that year. This encourages honest reporting of the income by the individuals who are working in Georgia. What this does is that we have a lot of people in the state who they'll go to work for an employer and they'll either file a 1099 or either in a lot of cases as a bona fide employee, then they'll claim an exasperating or an inflated number of dependents. And once they start claiming a lot of dependents, then automatically there's no income taxes that are taken out on. Then at the end of that year, then they disappear, take a hiatus, which is basically the way a lot of the undocumented folks in the state do, and the state's lost the income tax off of it. And by doing this, by handling it this way, then they will have to file a legitimate income tax return to get that tax back at the end of that first year.
Members of the committee have any questions of the author of the bill? Representative Sims.
Representative Powell, on that, now, are you saying that the withholding, how are you going to tax withholding if nothing was withheld? Are you saying that there's nothing withheld? Is that
what I'm saying is currently there are people who will go to work as an employee, and they'll file, when they file their paperwork with the employer, then they'll put down a lot more dependents than they have.
I understand.
So this way,
just 6% of what they pay in. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. This says so. If you're an employee in this state, then that first year, if you've never filed a income tax form in Georgia or income tax return in Georgia, that first year, then you'll be taxed at 6%, which is the Georgia income tax rate.
Follow-up question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
What about in the case where we have these situations where a Social Security number is used, may have 5 or 6 people on the same income tax and different ones using the same income tax number? Who gets taxed in that opinion, in your opinion?
I go back to what I've said. If that employee has never paid before, then they'll have to pay that 6%, and then in the filing, then that'll have to be worked out at that point. Now, if somebody's using a bogus income or a Social Security number, and you know the Revenue Departments will hopefully they'll be able to cross-reference and find out if that's so during that period of year, and maybe even catch a few more tax cheats.
Understand. Thank you.
Representative Abrams, Minority Leader.
Mr. Powell, does this take into account any persons who have lawful extensions to file? Because sometimes those extensions can last for longer than a year. would this take into account those persons who've been lawfully allowed to extend their time to file and thus are not in violation of the intent of the law but may be in violation of the letter of the law?
To my good friend, I'm not on the Ways and Means Committee, and never have I been on this committee, and I will leave those details up to the wisdom of the committee to look into.
Thank you.
Any further questions of the author? Representative Beasley Teague, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Powell, I just want to know, when you say they haven't filed taxes in their state previously and they're working here. Now, I have a lot of military people that, well, all over the state we have military people. And they come in first time here, never filed state income tax or whatnot. Are you going to say that you're going to take 6% from them off the top?
That's exactly what this is saying, because at the end of that tax reporting year, then they can file their income tax return, and if they have paid their taxes legitimately, then it'll be adjusted so they'll get a refund back. Basically, this allows people to pay their share in advance, or as most of us do, and then it just sort of stops up the holes for people who cheat the state out of the revenues, which basically cost all the rest of us.
Representative Flood has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Powell, would this mean that an employer would have to first assess whether or not the person has a legitimate 6%? Are you suggesting that for every employee, the business will withhold that 6% and pay that 6% on their behalf, regardless of...
The way this is written is that the Department of Revenue, if an employee comes to an employer, that employer can check with the Department of Revenue to see if that person has, in fact, filed a income tax return in the previous year, showing that they have been legitimate in what they're doing.
And if that person has not worked in the state of Georgia,
And
then
if that
the
Georgia
employer
has
is going to be
not
responsible
filed
for...
a previous income tax return in the state of Georgia, then they'll be withheld at the percent of 6%.
Okay.
At the end of that year, then they will file their returns, and if there's if they get a refund, then they'll get a refund.
All right, thank you.
Vice Chairman of this committee, Representative Knight.
Powell, does this take into account maybe other sources of income or losses that may offset income that may show up on a W-2, or deductions that are allowed?
Again, Mr. Vice Chairman, that's the purpose of the Ways and Means Committee.
Chairman Martin.
Gentlemen, the question, your intent here is to get people that are gaming the system, is it not, and leave
My intent is to put a system in, or to give y'all an idea to perfect something that will stop the tax cheats, the people that are coming into this state, whether they're a legitimate citizen or whether they're an undocumented citizen, that will come into this state and they will then get a job, and they'll file that they have 8 or 10 or 12 dependents in their house, and nothing is ever taken out of their income.
Yep.
And then at the end of the year, they've taken a hiatus and they're gone, and the state of Georgia has not been the due amount of taxes that was paid on that income. Also, for those who might possibly use the 1099 provision.
To follow up, I'm with you on that. So everybody captures this as an ooh-ah about the 6%. If one is filing correctly, I mean, the maximum difference between what they would pay extra if they were a legitimate taxpayer and were going to file a return at the end of the year, taking into account that they may have deductions, it's a maximum $350 additional dollars, because that's maximum. It's actually less than that, because that's where we're bracketed in. You get to 6% pretty fast in Georgia anyway. So you're willing to work with the subcommittee, if Chairman points in that direction, to get to the military issues, to get, if you come into the state of Georgia and you can show that you filed a valid return in North Carolina with 6 dependents, you don't, if we perfect the legislation, you'd be fine with exempting that. You just want to get somebody that just showed up 42 years old, you showed up and you never proven you filed a tax return any place, and you file a lot of exemptions, you leave Georgia with no tax, and see you at the end of the year.
You're exactly right, and I'm certainly willing to work with this committee, since, you know, I will say up front that this committee, they've dealt with these issues for years, And I think they know from where I'm coming, this is only an idea that hopefully to be perfected by this committee to stop up the loophole, because those of us who pay our share, we feel that everybody else should pay their share also. And for every dollar that the state is cheated out of taxes, then that's money that's spread around everybody else who is legitimate in their notions of paying taxes.
Any further questions, members of the committee? Thank you, Representative Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members.
House Bill 480 is Representative Jurgensen in the room. Seems like I remember seeing his name excused today. Does Representative Jurgensen have a designee? No designee. Okay, we'll. House Bill 492, Representative Hextall. Is Representative Hextall in the audience? Does Representative...
Representative Hextall is not here, but Representative Hextall and I have essentially the same bill. So 492 and 507 are essentially the same.
So you're acting as Representative Hextall's
Yes, sir.
designee, is that right?
Yes, sir.
You may proceed.
Thank you.
Read the caption.
I'm sorry, excuse me. If, Mr. Secretary, if you would read the caption of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To amend Code Section 488200 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to definitions relative to water and sewer projects at cost tax, so to change a certain definition to repeal conflicting laws and for other purposes.
The bill is assigned to the Sales Tax Committee. Representative Flood, you want to explain?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. This bill is essentially a municipal option sales tax, which provides the city of College Park the opportunity to enact through a referendum a 1% sales tax to allow them to collect funds that would specifically be for water and sewer maintenance and repair.
Questions of the author? Representative Martin, Chairman Martin.
Representative Flood, the operative section is redefining a municipality to be those two cities, I guess. So well, in this case, it's one city, and you have another one. Nothing in here talks about where the money shall go, or is that? I'm only seeing a paragraph in the bill. Is that outlined in something that's surrounding it in the code section?
Yes, sir. What this does, Representative Martin, is it takes what is already an existing law that only applies to the city of Atlanta.
Okay, I'm good. It's the 8th cent.
Correct.
Okay, I understand.
Secretary of the Committee, Representative Sims.
Representative Flood, is this a population bill? What I'm saying is we're running into these problems. I just wonder if it's general population bill.
Well, it's not, actually, there's not a population bill. It's really because it doesn't apply to a population. Actually, when you see it's basically 85 million gallons per day. It's not a number of people in the city. It's based on the usage and utilization of water on a daily basis.
Any further questions of the author? Next bill is House Bill 507. Representative Flood, Mr. Secretary, if you read the caption.
To amend, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To amend Code Section 488200 Official Code Annotated relative to water and sewer projects that cost tax, has to change certain definitions, repeal conflicting laws and other purposes.
Mr. Chairman, House Bill 507 is exactly the same as the prior bill. There was some confusion in the drafting, but I just wanted to make sure that the committee was aware that these are exactly the same.
So well, we're just running with 492 then.
That's fine, sir.
Okay. Next bill is House Bill 531. I see Representative Kidd in the audience. Mr. Secretary, if you would read the caption, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To amend Code Section 4871 of the Official Code relating to definition regarding income taxes so as to change the definition of taxable non-residents to provide an effective date and provide for applicability.
Assigned to the Income Tax Subcommittee. Representative Kidd, if you would give a brief explanation of what your bill does, sir.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Y'all have tried to address this in the last several years, and we've had some success in addressing it in different areas. In 531 and 532 and similar subject matter. But 531 deals with, supposed to deal with an individual whose family lives here in Georgia. His wife might be registered to vote here and so forth, but he makes a bunch of money overseas or somewhere and has castles here and castles there. But he dodges paying Georgia income tax because he declares himself a resident somewhere else. But his family goes to school in Georgia, his wife votes in Georgia, and so forth. So he's really a Georgia resident, but he claims he's not because he's making a bunch of money and doesn't want to pay taxes on it out of state. That's kind of the purpose of 531. Now, how the Revenue Department finds those people, I'm not really sure. But
Questions of the author? No questions of the author. Okay. House Bill 532.
yes, sir.
Representative Kidd, Secretary, read the caption, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. To amend Article 5, Chapter 7, Title 48 Official Code relating to current income tax payment and withholding so as to provide for the taxability of compensation paid to entertainers, professional athletes, provide for income tax withholding on such compensation, provide withholding without regard to whether an entertainer or professional athlete is considered an employee and for other purposes.
Income Tax Subcommittee, Representative Kidd.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, briefly, we did address this a few years ago where we found out that Braves baseball players and others were drawing humongous salaries here in Georgia, Georgians' money, but their residence was out of town. Like Greg Maddox, for instance, he was being paid $18 million, but he paid no Georgia income tax. He claimed his residency was in Las Vegas, so he paid no tax out there. But yet when he moved to New York, was making $18 million in New York, he had to pay income tax in New York, although he still claimed his residency in Las Vegas. I think the Revenue Department is going after those people now. The Braves, for instance, when they go to 11 other states to play ball, the Braves players who play in those games are taxed on the amount of money that they make for playing X number of innings in those cities. When the other teams come to Georgia, we don't tax them the same way that the Braves players are taxed when they go to another 11 cities. And this is an attempt to do that. And that also that the entertainers that come into Georgia, be it the country music people or whatever else, that Garth Brooks, whoever comes in and makes a bunch of millions of dollars by putting on a couple of concerts here in Georgia, kind of skips town before he has to pay any taxes in Georgia. Just like professional golfers come into town and they might win $10 million at one golf tournament for a week. They don't pay any. They kind of skip town and don't pay any taxes. That's the purpose of this, Mr. Chairman.
Questions of the author? Chairman Martin.
Direct a question to Chairman Representative Hardman is if this passes, they think they'll move the Masters into South Carolina.
I was thinking that Representative Kidd might have gone to meddling there towards the end.
No, sir, I think the Masters will be there forever. Thanks to you and other folks that's there. And it's
I think it's time to move on to House Bill 546. Representative Stevens, Minister Secretary, if you'll read the caption, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To amend Code Section 4883 of the Official Code relating to exemptions from sales and use tax so as to extend for a limited period of time an exemption with respect to sales of tangible property used for in the renovation or expansion of a zoological institution.
Sales Tax Subcommittee, Representative Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a sunsetted bill that was vetted, 3 years ago and expired July of 11. This bill essentially just places the this sales tax revenue to and plows it right back into the new exhibits in the zoo, and it's one that has a fiscal impact or had a fiscal impact of about $150,000. That exemption created about 100 jobs with the zoo, and the specific purpose for this is, and the goal, of course, is to demonstrate to the donors, and they're in a huge donation drive now, is that the state of Georgia, along with the local government, has a vested interest in the zoo.
Questions of the author? House Bill 547, Representative Pack Mule Stevens, If you would read the caption, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To amend Code Section 4883 of the official code relating to exemption from sales and use taxes so as to provide an exemption for the sales or use of fuel for the use of cooling of refrigerated shipping containers.
Sales Tax Subcommittee, Representative Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This was a bill that was offered to me by the Georgia Ports Authority. Asked that they could bring the use of the sales and use of fuel in line with the exemption that's they already enjoy with equipment on the Georgia Ports Authority. Essentially, the fuel is in those reefer containers or refrigerated containers that go on these ships for long trips and come back and that kind of stuff. And this is just an exemption to make them competitive with our surrounding states.
Questions of the author. House Bill 564, Representative Maddox. Representative Billy Maddox, is he here? Representative Billy Maddox, does he have a designee? House Bill 578, Representative Martin, Mr. Secretary, if you would read the caption.
Marion, sir.
Marion, I'm sorry, Marion. Is Representative Marion here?
You caught me off guard, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman.
I did. Okay, is Representative Marion's designee here? Okay, House Bill 595, Representative Black. I'm thinking that he might want. Is Representative Black here?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to address this or not?
Let's go ahead and sign it to committee. I think it's dead, but. I'll take it.
House Bill 595, Representative Black, if the Secretary would read the caption.
Being that I'm an undertaker, I like this. To amend Code Section 48740.1 of the official code relating to income tax credits for jobs created by business enterprises in less than developed areas so as to provide that in certain circumstances tax credits may be earned for jobs created in the year prior to the year in which an area was designated by the Department of Community Affairs.
Income tax, Representative Black.
This bill and also 596 for a couple of bills I introduced last year at request of my little senator that was working with a local business that and the Department of Community Affairs. I thought this thing was dead, and I still think it probably is, but I find out after I talked to you earlier today that the senator would like to have these things kept alive. So if you would, I would appreciate you go ahead and sign it to the subcommittee. It has to do with job credit for jobs created. Tax credit for jobs created.
All right. Chairman has stepped out, and I'll finish this up until he returns. Should he return, we will sign it to the Income Tax Committee. Is there any questions of the author?
Yes. Do I have to have the subcommittee hearing bill dead?
Should be a short one. All right. And what's the next bill? 596.
Representative Black and others to amend Code Section 4874.40.1 of the official code relating to income tax credits for jobs created by business enterprises in less developed areas so as to provide that under certain circumstances that tax credits may be earned for jobs created in the year prior to the year in which an area was designated by the Department of Community Affairs.
Okay. Representative Black.
This is the same as the other one, except this was allowed credit for prior years.
Okay.
If they were to.
All right. We'll sign that bill, even though it may be dead, in the Income Tax Committee. All right. I've got one, House Bill 621. Yeah, Mr. Secretary.
Okay. Representative Knight and others, House Bill 621 to amend Article 2, Chapter 7, Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to the imposition rate and computation of exemptions regarding income tax so as to provide for an income tax credit with respect to qualified reforestation expenses, to provide for conditions and limitations, and to provide for powers, duties, and authority of the State Revenue Commission with respect to the foregoing.
This bill is seeking to look at qualified reforestation expenses, and this is going back to when we had the fires in South Georgia. Basically, looking at seeing if we can help our forestry industry out when a natural disaster occurs. So we look forward to talking about this in committee.
Any questions of the author?
All right, we'll
Assign that to the Income Tax Committee.
all right, well, Chairman is back in. We'll turn the mic back over to Chairman Chanel.
House Bill 634, Representative Shelton. Okay, Secretary, read
House
the
Bill
caption of the bill.
634 by Representative Sheldon and others to amend Section 48.524 of the Official Code relating to the installment payment of ad valorem taxes so as to change provisions relative to population brackets and census regarding interest on unpaid and ad valorem taxes in each county of this state having a population of $800,000 or more according to the United States decennial census of 2000 and any other future census.
Ad valorem tax. Representative Shelton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. This is one of the bills. I know Chairman Sims had talked about population bills, and this is one of those bills. House Bill 634 preserves the current method for calculating interest on property tax installment payments in Gwinnett County. Fulton is authorized to charge 2% per month for the first 6 months and then no months after that. So with our population increase in Gwinnett, we're just trying to keep in place our current interest penalty interest system. So that's what this bill does, House Bill 634.
Questions of the author? Thank you.
Thank you.
House Bill 715, Representative Riley. Mr. Secretary, if you read the caption.
House Bill 715 by Representative Riley and others to amend Article 6, Chapter 5, Title 48 of the Georgia Code relating to municipal taxation as to provide for limitation on certain contracts to assess and collect municipal taxes and prepare tax digests, to provide for an effective date and repeal conflicting laws and other purposes.
Senate Bill to Public Finance and Policy. Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Article 6 provides for municipal governments to contract with their county government and tax commissioner for tax collection services. The municipality is required to compensate the county for the approximate cost of providing the service. However, it also allows the tax commissioner to contract directly with municipalities to receive personal compensation without regard to the costs incurred to perform this service. While many tax commissioners in Georgia do not seek personal compensation for municipal tax collection services, there are some that do. In the case that I'm most familiar with, the county tax commissioner receives in excess of $190,000 per year personal benefit in addition to an annual salary and county supplement of well over $100,000. House Bill 715 seeks to protect the taxpayers in Georgia's cities from excessive payment for tax collection services. We believe that it's a matter of good public policy to restrict tax commissioners from personal benefit for services that are provided by county personnel and resources. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions of the author? Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
House Bill 729. The Secretary will read the caption.
House Bill 729 by Representative Knight to amend Title 48 of the Official Code relating to revenue and taxation as to define the terms Internal Revenue Code, the Internal Revenue Code of 1986, and thereby incorporate certain provisions of the federal law into the Georgia law, to provide for certain corporate income tax elections made for federal income tax purposes shall also apply for state income tax purposes.
Representative Knight.
Thank you to the members of the committee. This is the annual IRC update where we seek to adjust Georgia code for the changes that have gone on at the federal level.
Questions of the author? I see none. Thank you, Vice Chairman Knight. House Resolution 1119, Representative Scott. If you would read the caption, please.
House Resolution 1119 by Representative Scott and others, urging Congress to pass legislation that will create a uniform national framework on digital commerce to protect consumers from multiple and discriminatory taxes, provide for certainty and uniformity for state and local governments and other purposes.
Chair signed it to the Tax Reform Subcommittee. Representative Scott.
In Georgia and throughout the country, legislative bodies are looking at putting internet sales on equal footing as brick and mortar businesses. The legitimate question is, who and how do we tax internet sales? I understand the concern that local businesses should not be at a tax disadvantage because someone buys a product in their store. By taxing the sales in stores and not the internet, these businesses are at a disadvantage. My concern is that we are now looking at a haphazard process which is inconsistent and could result in repetitive taxation. I am concerned that the people in my district will be taxed multiple times for internet sales if there is not a uniform process. I am introducing this resolution to encourage the U.S. Congress to establish a uniform process to prevent double taxation of goods. A uniform process is good for local jobs and is a good tax policy. Thank you.
Questions of the author? I see none. Thank you. House Bill 743 by Representative Rice. If the Secretary would read the caption.
House Bill 743 by Representative Rice to amend Code Section 4893 of the Official Code relating to motor fuel tax so as to extend the expiration date for the exemption from motor fuel tax for certain public transit and public campus transportation systems.
It is goes to the Sales Tax Subcommittee. Representative Rice.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to explain this bill for just a moment. This is a continuation of an exemption from motor fuel tax for all Georgia's transit systems. It's been in effect since 2005. It's been extended twice. Basically, the fiscal effect is about $2.1 million per year. It is already accounted for in the GDOT transportation budget and is expected to continue from the standpoint of their budgeting view. What it does basically is to allow our transit systems to operate without having to pass this cost on to the county and to the fare box riders.
Questions of the author? I see none. Thank you, Representative Rice. House Bill 747, Representative Beverly. Secretary, read the caption.
House Bill 747 by Representative Beverly and others to amend Article 2, Chapter 7, Title 48 of the Official Code relating to the imposition of income taxes, rate, computation, and exemptions so as to provide that any census tract having a poverty rate of 45% or greater shall be deemed to have the same eligibility for tax treatment as a Tier 1 county.
Chair assigned it to the Income Tax Subcommittee. Representative Beverly, you may explain your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. The purpose of this bill is to target income tax credits to Category 4 poverty areas in the state of Georgia. Category 4 poverty areas are defined by areas that have a 40% or greater poverty areas, so they are pathological areas. Our current system is broken down into 4 tax tiers. The counties that have the highest tax incentives are counties that are marred by high unemployment, residents in poverty, and low per capita income. And so you may effectively have a Category 4 poverty area, census tract, that lives outside of Category 1. It may be in a Category 4 that doesn't get the same incentive as a Category 1 tax incentive. So what this bill aims to do is to say that if a census tract has a poverty area of 40% or greater, that it will qualify for a Tier 1 tax incentive, which lowers the threshold of how many employees you can have and gives a greater incentive to actually help out those communities that are in dire straits throughout the state of Georgia, whether you fall within the county system or not.
Questions of the author? Chair sees none. Thank you very much, Representative. To members of the committee, I appreciate you being on time and attending this meeting. This meeting is adjourned.